From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Gregg Ibendahl returns, this time to share his just-released projections on fertilizer prices for the 2021 crop production year. He uses an economic model he developed a couple of years ago that comes at this outlook in a different way. Also today, from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen will comment on some of the tax policy proposals now being discussed, how those might impact farm, estate, and business planning. Later, K-State's Cheryl Boyer previews K-State's Garden Hour, a series of informational webinars for gardeners and homeowners that begins today. And standing by with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. As always, glad to have you aboard. And opening up this Wednesday edition, we bring back in farm management economist Gregg Ibendahl of K-State Research and Extension. Gregg has been running numbers on all sorts of farm management analyses of late, and we've told you about several. Here is the latest. Gregg has put together a write-up on his fertilizer price outlook for 2021. And we'll eventually get to your expectations here, Gregg, but this is built upon something that you started a couple of years back, drawing relationships between fertilizer prices and the drivers of those prices. You might remind us of your approach here.
Well, so I've always kind of had an interest in predicting fertilizer prices, so I've always been trying to find out some way to predict those. And before, I kind of had always been looking at the idea that we should be able to predict anhydrous ammonia prices from the natural gas price because they use natural gas in the process of making anhydrous ammonia. Literally, they take the nitrogen out of the air through a catalytic reaction by burning the natural gas. So you would think that the anhydrous ammonia price should be directly tied to the natural gas price. Well, I did develop some models that way, but it turned out that really natural gas is a very poor predictor of what the anhydrous ammonia price was. So I kind of started playing around and looking at some other things. And 2 years ago, I kind of hit on a combination that kind of worked. I used corn as my predictor price, and then I used oil as a price, and those two together kind of represented something about the supply and demand for anhydrous, and both those together actually gave me a pretty good model.
So we want to talk of those, but just noting here with what's happened recently with natural gas prices and their volatility, it's probably a good thing that relationship isn't as tight as once was thought, Gregg.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the reason why it doesn't work too well. So there'll be periods where anhydrous and natural gas prices are tied pretty close together, but then we get periods like happening right now where there's a huge demand for natural gas for heating, and natural gas really shoots up there for a while. So it really kind of then throws a big wrench in my model to predict fertilizer prices. So I look for something a little less volatile, and oil really turns out to meet the trick. So it's oil is pretty highly correlated with the natural gas price, and then using my model took a lot of that variability that was causing me problems before.
Let's talk then about the influence of corn price and oil price on anhydrous ammonia prices in particular here. Now, corn represents the demand for anhydrous, you say.
Yeah, because corn, obviously, as the price goes up, our basic economic theory says that as the price of something goes up, you'll be willing to put on more inputs because it pays you to do that. So as corn prices go up, we're willing to put on more fertilizer just because there's value in doing that. And then the other thing what the corn price does too, it does, and again, this is relative to the other prices. So like if the corn price goes up higher than the soybean price, that will cause a shift in acres to corn, and corn obviously is going to use a lot more nitrogen fertilizers than soybeans, which is really not going to use any. So depending on what the crop mix is and how high the price is, we could use a lot of nitrogen or not so much.
Now, those prices, corn and nitrogen, don't move in lockstep. There's a lag, a time lag here, you say.
Yeah, just a little bit. My model 2 years ago, I actually kind of used the current national corn price, and then use that as a predictor in Anhydrous. I found now, though, that if I introduce a 2-month lag between what the corn price is and what the Anhydrous price is, that works a little bit better. So it's not a big change, but it does kind of probably represent what's happening. It takes a little bit of time when you see a price change before it actually shows up in the input price. So it does fit my model a little bit better.
And then, as you say, your model represents the supply side by that oil price, which is a better correlation than natural gas prices. So explain how that works, Gregg.
Well, that relationship's a little more complicated, since obviously we don't use oil to make anhydrous, but we do use natural gas. So my thinking about that is we use natural gas and oil kind of in the same kind of markets for things. So when natural gas is high, then we'll use probably more oil and vice versa here. So they kind of represent the same things. And actually, natural gas and oil are pretty highly correlated. I think it's about a 0.65 correlation or so. So that does represent something about the inputs that goes into it on the natural gas side, but it captures everything I want to get out from the natural gas side, but with a lot less volatility. So for my purposes for this modeling of fertilizer price, I found that was a better input to use other than using natural gas.
And in this case, anhydrous prices respond to changes in oil prices with an even greater time lag.
Yeah, and that's what makes it nice from a model. So I can look at what happened about 9 months ago, and that actually shows up in the model as today's anhydrous ammonia price, which makes sense when you think about it. So, producers are making long-term decisions about how to make fertilizer, and certainly what the price happened back 9 months ago has an bearing on what's happening now by the time you get through the whole production process and such.
So you can throw this all together in the model and come up with an idea of what anhydrous ammonia prices might be ahead as we focus on that form of nitrogen here in this instance. How well has the model worked in the first 2 years that you've employed this method, Gregg?
Well, so, the best way to test the model is actually not use all your data and then see how it actually did, because you can really fit pretty much any model into the data. So what I did was, in one of my comparisons, was I took my model from 2 years ago, which is a little bit different than my currently estimated model, but not a whole lot different. And I used that to see how that model predicted things from starting from the beginning of 2019 through 2020 to see how I did predicting for data that I didn't actually have in the original model estimation. And I found out my correlation from my predicted prices from 2 years ago actually had about a 0.65 or 0.67 correlation. So a pretty good prediction of using my model from 2 years ago to predict what happened over the last 2 years. So I was pretty happy to see that.
So this lends to the validity of this method, which leads us then to what may happen with fertilizer prices, more specifically anhydrous ammonia prices, here in 2021. What are you coming up with?
Well, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. We see what grain prices and corn price in particular have gone up quite a bit over the last couple of months, and you're seeing it now show up in the fertilizer price. So I was a little worried, when I first put this paper together about a week ago, that I already may be underestimating what's happening out there. So, corn price is very volatile right now. We're seeing that happen in the fertilizer prices jumping up quite a bit. And also remember, too, my current prediction for fertilizer is actually based on what the oil price was 9 months ago, which 9 months ago we were talking about oil prices in the $20 to, maybe low $30 range. So going forward over the next 9 months to a year, there's a good chance we're going to see a fairly significant rise in anhydrous prices going forward, just because the oil price increases will start to build up. I think, current oil prices are probably in the low $50 range, so there's quite a bit of upside there to happen, and if corn prices stay high, I really think you're looking at anhydrous for national price by come fall could be about over $600 a ton. Again, if we get to $600, that would be a 50% increase in our anhydrous price over the course of about a year to 18 months.
Does this apply to other fertilizer, phosphorus, potash, and the like?
Yeah, it does. At the very end of my paper, I have a correlation of how much correlation there is between anhydrous and the other fertilizers. So as you might expect, any of the nitrogen fertilizer is going to be very highly tied to the anhydrous ammonia price. So like when anhydrous goes up high, urea is going to follow right along with it. But what is a little bit surprising is there's a very strong correlation between things like potash and anhydrous, where they're certainly different products and such. But I think a high demand for nitrogen means there's probably a high demand for other fertilizers too. So really all those fertilizers tend to kind of go up and down together to some degree.
And you capture all of that in a series of tables that you've included with your paper posted on the agmanager.info website. You were thinking that anhydrous prices might pull back in the fall, but if oil prices rise, as some are predicting throughout the course of this year, 2021, could that outlook change, Gregg?
Oh, I think it very definitely could, because I think the oil futures market is very conservative on their estimates. If we look out on the futures exchange for oil, it's only in the upper 40s, lower 50s for the couple of years out. I really think oil prices are going to go higher than that. I really expect somewhere in the next couple of years that, if the economy keeps growing, we could have $100 in oil again. That would definitely add a big increase to the fertilizer price. And then, again, the only reason I'm showing a downturn in fertilizer prices come fall is because the futures market has corn price kind of dropping off a little bit. That may or may not happen. If that doesn't happen and corn prices stay high, then I don't think you're going to see that turn down in fertilizer come fall. It could either stay steady or even go back up even higher yet. So I have $600 as my top end right now, but it would not surprise me at all if we see anhydrous ammonia go higher than that. So, $700 is probably certainly in the talking point range right now.
Then the management strategy, considering this, is to lock in as much fertilizer as you can in advance, as you can price it more favorably?
Well, I hope farmers have actually purchased a lot of their fertilizer ahead of time, because I think it's high and it's heading higher here. So that's not a bad situation. Now, what may happen, though, actually, is that this could favor the planting of soybeans if nitrogen goes real high, because obviously, we don't have to put nitrogen fertilizer in soybean. So that may possibly cause a switch, maybe in some acres, possibly. Again, it's going to also depend on what our ratio of our corn to soybean price is as well.
Well, this is an interesting read that gives an idea of where those fertilizer prices may be headed in 2021, based on Gregg's formula that is proven to be quite helpful in depicting these trends. And he has a write-up on all of this on the agmanager.info website. Once more, we'd advise you producers to have a look. As always, Gregg, it's good work. Thank you for covering it with us. We'll catch up with you again quite soon.
All right, thanks.
Gregg Ibendahl, he's a farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll have more on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and visiting once more with Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation out of the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, who's with us every other Wednesday here. Last time out, Roger, we started to discuss what are being proposed in the way of tax policy changes here in this country, and at that time we concentrated largely on the income tax possibilities out there. But as promised, this time we'll get into the estate and business planning side of these ideas that are being forwarded by policymakers, at least some now, and their ramifications for agricultural producers. And there are some rather serious issues on the table here, are there not?
Well, there certainly are, Eric. These ideas, if they get formulated into a bill that would actually become law, could prove to be very troublesome for a lot of farms and ranches. And one of the big ones out there that there's discussion about is taking the current federal estate tax exemption equivalent from covering about, or for this year, covering $11.7 million of wealth and value in an estate down to somewhere between $3 to $5 million. And that would be a substantial game changer in terms of a lot of estate and business planning that we do for farmers and ranchers.
You've included some detail on that very matter in your blog on this topic on your website. And you might go through some of the numbers that illustrate just how concerning this could be for agricultural producers and their families.
Well, current USDA data indicates that the present average U.S. farmland value for all classes of land, so this is an average and it's all classes, so keep that in mind. Everybody's situation is going to be different. But for all classes, the average land value ag land was $3,160 per acre in 2020. And nationwide, according to USDA, the average farm size is 445 acres. So the typical U.S. farming operation using those numbers has land worth of about $1.4 million. Now, if you add in livestock and farm machinery and equipment and grain inventory, the home, the outbuildings, retirement savings, life insurance, other miscellaneous assets, that can easily get you to the $3 to $5 million range. Now, again, just to emphasize, those are averages, and the federal estate tax is based on net worth, so you would take your asset value, subtract off the debt. But the point is that a reduction in the exemption to under or at the $5 million level would be of considerable concern to a lot of farm and ranch families, as well as other small business owners in this country.
Yeah. And this could be a retroactive change that could stir the pot, if you will, in as far as those estate plans?
Well, they could. They can do that constitutionally, and of course, they have to come up with a rationale, a reasonable rationale for doing that. And I presume that they could say, well, we need revenue because of the virus, and they've done retroactive tax changes in the past, and the Supreme Court really hasn't pushed them back much on that. Now, that would be really nasty if that were done, because then you can't really do any planning. You're kind of stuck where you are right now if they make it retroactive back to the beginning of the year. So the rug effectively gets pulled out from underneath your feet. I would hope that would not be the case, that if there are changes this dramatic, it would only apply for future years going forward, but we shall see.
And one other point on this, there's even some discussion, you say, about the actual estate and gift tax rate being raised.
Well, it would go up. What I've seen talked about is the top rate moving from 40 to 45%. Now, when I started out in practice almost 30 years ago, it was 55% on the top end, and it was graduated. It technically still is graduated, but your bump is at a very low level, and you hit the 40% level, not quite out of the gate. So it technically is graduated, but you get there real fast and you stay there. So it's, in essence, we think of it as a flat 40% rate, and that could go to 45.
All right. Well, the one thing we do want to dwell on today for sure, and you call it the monster in the room amidst all of the possible estate and business planning tax changes that could come forth, how basis would be handled in transactions and stepped-up basis in particular. Producers who have exchanged land or passed land down or other assets to heirs over the years understand the importance of this, but you might remind us of what this is about.
Yeah, this is the big one. Income tax basis in assets is important to every single estate, every farm and ranch family. The estate tax is not a big deal currently with that exemption sitting at $11.7 million. That gets you to almost $24 million, so it's $23.4 million combined for a married couple. And then you have portability of any unused exemption at the death of the first spouse over to the surviving spouse if you file an estate tax return to port it over. So the estate tax itself is not that big of a deal for very many people. It is if you've got a big estate, and it's a very big concern for them. But in terms of the volume of estates and the numbers, no, it's not a big deal. What is a big deal for everybody, regardless of the value of the estate, is getting that new income tax basis equal to the date of death value of the assets at the time the decedent dies in the hands of the heirs, so that if the heirs sell the property, all that appreciation in value during the period of ownership of the decedent evaporates and it's not taxed. Well, there's talk that would change, and I think this is more than just talk. This will probably get formulated in some type of bill that the Congress will be asked to vote on, and it would change that basis rule to a carryover basis rule. Now, if we apply that in an ag context, there is a tremendous amount of not just agricultural land, but other ag assets, machinery, equipment, those types of things that have a very low and even zero basis if it's in, say, a tractor or combine that has utilized the vast methods of depreciation that they've been incentivized to do so in recent years, and they've wiped out their income tax basis. So you could conceivably inherit a $400,000 tractor that has that fair market value still, but it has no income tax basis because it was all written off in year one, which is possible. Now you'd have to pay tax on that if you were to sell it. Now, some may say, well, that's only an issue if the heirs sell the property. Well, they're talking about another tweak on this to trigger the capital gain at death, not when the heir sells it. So not only would you lose the basis step up, the tax would be triggered on account of death. Those two combined would just be disastrous for a lot of farm and ranch families, and I sure hope that doesn't happen.
This will be a point of conversation, to say the least, among agricultural policy interests and so forth here as we move forward. So, Roger, the magnitude of this stepped-up basis question and how things might change with regard to capital gains tax, the other possible provisions out there that could be of negative consequence to farmers and ranchers. What can producers be doing now in anticipation of any or all of these changes? What planning could they possibly carry out?
Well, that's a great question, and I think the one thing that needs to be done right now is that they need to be in contact with their professionals that can look at their current situation and provide them some guidance as to what they might be able to do right now, and then come up with a plan for the longer term. Nothing has changed yet, so maybe there are some things that can be done to align asset ownership, maybe start utilizing the gift tax exemption, which is that $11.7 million currently. That's the unified credit, so it applies for gifts and estates. So if we think that exemption is going to go down, maybe we want to go ahead and make some gifts, cover it with exemption, get the value in the estate at a lower level in case the exemption comes down. IRS currently says they won't claw back that difference at the time of death if the exemption is lower at death than it was at the time the gift was made. Now, they could change that position, but we don't know that. They have said right now they won't do that. So that's a strategy. Other types of strategies might include trusts, valuation discounting for entity interests, unless IRS removes that technique by regulation, which is also being discussed. So the big thing right now is to get in touch with your tax people, your estate planning people, your entity structuring people, and at least start the discussion. I'm actually doing a lot of that right now, fielding a lot of those questions as to what can you do, what's your current situation, what are moves you can and should make right now, and then we just have to react to the changes as they occur.
Pointing out once again, all of this that we're talking of is yet in deliberation. Nothing's cast in stone, so it can change. Nonetheless, it's better to err on the side of preparedness here, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. This is definitely a time when you've got to have your antennae up, you've got to be paying attention to what's going on and being in touch with your professionals.
We would also, as we usually do, refer you to Roger's blog, which covers this topic in full. It's What Now, Part 2 of possible tax changes that are being kicked around now, what they would mean to you agricultural producers. And you can find that write-up at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR on Roger's blog post. And as always, Roger, thanks. We'll catch up again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Eric.
He is Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. After the break, we'll tell you about an upcoming K-State webinar series that ought to put you in a mindset of spring. And who couldn't use that right now? More on that coming up on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today continues now. Eric Atkinson here, taking a few moments now to preview an informational series that actually gets going in about an hour and a half from now. And this series will continue right into the spring, then summer and fall. It's put on by the good folk with K-State Research and Extension Horticulture, and this is for all of you horticultural enthusiasts, whatever your principal interest might be. It's called K-State's Garden Hour, and it's loaded with great information for you homeowners and gardeners on a variety of timely topics in the horticultural field. To let us know more about this now, nursery crops horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension, Cheryl Boyer. And this stems, Cheryl, from a similar and highly successful effort which took place starting about this time last year.
Yeah, that's right, Eric. So last year, as a pandemic response, we initiated this K-State Garden Hour webinar series, and it was so popular that the second week we ran out of room in our 500-seat Zoom room, and then we ended up purchasing a 1,000-seat webinar license, and it just has been really popular, and we've modified it a little bit off of what we've learned from participants and what they liked and what they didn't like and what worked well and what didn't work well. And so we're excited to launch a 2021 series.
And it's, as the name would imply, a series of webinar sessions covering everything to do with gardening or lawn care or what have you, right?
Right. So last year, our approach was kind of just, hey, we all have great presentations, let's share them. And they didn't really have a rhyme or reason. It was more about when we were able to do them. And this year we decided to take the approach of planning a series of webinars that really goes along with what's important to know as the season progresses. So our very first webinar is going to be about planning your vegetable garden, which is probably the next big gardening activity that's on the radar. And so we're just going to kind of progress through things that you may be thinking about early in the season, because as you know, especially with the weather we're having right now, nobody's gardening, but there's probably lots of dreaming and planning that is happening indoors.
It'll whet the appetite for that outdoor activity. We didn't say who they are. It's your colleagues from throughout the state in K-State Research and Extension Horticulture, right?
That's right. This is one of my favorite things about this program. I'm a state specialist, and this has been such a wonderful opportunity to showcase the deep talent we have across the state. So we have horticulture agents across the state in different counties and districts, and they all have a slightly different area of expertise because horticulture is very diverse. And so it's been really exciting to be able to use their talent and their expertise to present on all these different topics. So you get to hear from almost everybody on our team, and for sure everyone will show their face at some point or another as they host or moderate a session.
All right. Well, again, the first one is scheduled for today. These occur over the noon hour, and that's convenient for a lot of folks, each and every one of them. And this one coming right up on planning your vegetable garden. The horticulture agent for Research and Extension in Douglas County, Tom Buller, will be on board for that one. Then you have 4 more carrying through the month of April. Briefly tell us what those will get into, Cheryl.
Yeah, so on March 3rd, we have Anthony Reardon from the West Plains Extension District. He's going to talk about best plants for a beginner's landscape. And again, we did take all the comments from last year's evaluation and looked for themes, and these are things people asked for. On March 17th, we're going to have Matthew McKernan from Sedgwick County talk about pruning like a pro, tips for trees and shrubs, which hopefully by March 17th, things are thawing out a little bit and we're beginning to think about pruning. On April 7th, Travis Carmichael from Lyon County is going to talk about raised bed and container gardening. And then on April 21st, we're going to have Dennis Patton from Johnson County talk about gardening in the shade. One thing that's different this year is they're not every week, they're every other week, and we're going to do them in seasons. So we'll have a spring season, a summer season. We're going to take a break in July, come back in the fall, and we'll have a little bit of winter. The other thing that's exciting this year is that we have one registration. So you don't have to remember to register for every single one of these webinars. Register one time and you'll be on the list for all of them. And so we'll send you automated reminders that they're coming up. Don't forget. And then afterwards, we'll send an email out to let you know where it's been archived. So if you miss it, if you can't be there live for that noon hour, they're all recorded. And this year we're going to post them to YouTube. So you'll be able to watch them there, and you'll be able to watch the ones that we've archived from last year. We'll be working on that this spring.
Great. And presumably chances for interaction, questions and answers.
Yeah, so we're using a webinar platform, which has the ability for participants not to have to worry about whether or not their camera or their audio are on. But they can ask questions there's a question and answer box. There's also a chat box. So there's lots of opportunity to interact with the speaker and ask specific questions. So one thing that we were really proud of last year with the webinar series is that generally we had time to get to all of the questions that came through in the question and answer or the chat box, and we kept it on time. So pretty much without fail, it was a 60-minute program, including all of the questions. So we hope that everyone will sign up and get reminders and join us for 2021 K-State Garden Hour webinar series.
And just exactly how do they go about doing that then, Cheryl?
You can get to the list of topics where there's a register button by going to ksre-learn.com/K-State Garden Hour. You can probably just do a search for it and it'll pop up too.
And it's a free program. It's an outstanding opportunity to get caught up on the latest on a variety of horticulture topics pertinent to homeowners and gardeners all across Kansas. And the first session, again, is today over the noon hour, and that'll be focusing on planting your vegetable garden with K-State's Tom Buller. You've still time to be part of that, but step lively, for it's coming up shortly. Thanks, Cheryl, for letting us know about this series. The best of luck with it. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Nursery Crops horticulturist Cheryl Boyer, K-State Research and Extension. Again, that address to go to be part of this series of K-State Garden Hour webinars, ksre-learn.com/K-State Garden Hour, or simply search for K-State Garden Hour online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside one more time now, and when we come back, this week's entry on another facet of life in rural Kansas from K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Next for you here on the K-State Radio Network. Please keep it right here.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
We finally are having winter.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
We finally are having winter. There is some snow. I don't think enough to protect tender crops, but flurries were floating on the hill while I hauled in more firewood. The wood stack is getting low, and I may have to start taking from next year's supply. A square stack roughly 8 by 8 is drying. When I walked down the hill to get the mail, there was no mail. A few days earlier, my first spring catalog had been delivered. It's just a kind of reading for the evening with a roaring fire. Flipping the pages, I saw warmth, sunshine, and color. I saw blooming flower borders and fat, juicy fruits from berries to peaches. I saw delicious apples, pears, and grapes. I saw promises. Oh, and don't forget the cherries and the plums. And there were the vegetables, one page full with pictures of potatoes. I looked at the page with currants and remembered, as a child, we had to pick them. The currants were red and white. As I looked at the colored pictures, I could taste the gooseberries again. We had a long row of the bushes in our garden under the fruit trees in the orchard. A small orchard with about 6 apple trees on the high trunk. You could walk under the trees and we could climb them. Apple trees are easy trees to climb for a kid. Much easier than most pear trees, of which we also had a view. All trees were cared for, and they bore fruit. Of course, there are the melons, pumpkins, and the gourds. Yes, there is a photo of a giant pumpkin to haul on a semi-trailer to the local show and brag about it. Not my favorite. While sitting in a waiting room at my doctor's office for my medical, I watched a TV program and thought of the catalog. The TV was programmed for mute, and the program did not need explanation. It was a home remodeling program and cleverly done, much like a spring catalog. The big difference was the very instant makeover which modern TV techniques allow. I watched rooms and kitchens, as well as basements, being ripped apart, dust flying everywhere. At one time, a squirrel nest was discovered in a duct. But then, as quickly as everything was ripped out and removed, the new was brought in and installed. It all was done with a cheerful sound of yoop, yoop, yoop. Curtains were hung, walls repainted, new furniture arranged, and the young couple smiled and adored it. Yes, great advertising. It all was instant and to perfection. I did not see much family heritage. That probably would not fit the immediate satisfaction. And that is where I was reminded of my spring catalog. Oh, the colorful flower photos look so beautiful. It shows full, thick plants or gorgeous large blooms. All the flowering trees and shrubs are blooming and grown. Yes, they're grown. You can sit under them. The picture of the perennial border with full plants is fantastic. The hosta border looks great. The hedges are fully grown hedges you can hide behind. Not only that, the hedges are expertly clipped. They are narrower at the top than they are at the bottom, so that sunlight falls on the whole hedge, and there are no shaded dead branches at the bottom. I love the catalog, and will keep it handy for a while. And by the way, it has lots of sales. You can buy one plant, and for only 1 cent extra, you get another plant. That's nearly 2 for 1. That's not a bad idea, because if you buy plants, I suggest that you do buy more than 1 plant of each perennial, even of the shrubs, if you have a larger yard. Starting plants are small. They really are. So I'm not against buying 5 where there is space to fill. And that is where my thoughts were in the waiting room. I saw a bare wall. 5 seconds later, a large bookcase was set against it. A bare corner, and flip, there was a chair, and flip, a side table and lamp. In no time, the room was filled and ready to live in. That's not how the development of a garden goes. Not only that, the arrangements in a room I can change. I may take some time and do it all over again in an afternoon. But by evening, all is rearranged, and I can watch TV again in my favorite chair, but from a different corner. Not so in a yard or garden. Once planted, you want it to grow where it is planted. So you have to think. I suggest a piece of paper and drawing a plan to scale so that you know what you're going to do. Several county agents hold landscape workshops to help you along. There are also extension publications on landscaping. It's a good start to read and understand what it takes to create an attractive, colorful yard. It takes planning and time. It takes time for plants to grow. There is satisfaction in seeing plants grow and trees mature. There's satisfaction in improving the soil so plants can root well. There's nothing wrong with showing instant rooms or whole house makeover. And there's nothing wrong with a beautiful and enticing spring catalog. It's a free gift.
Gus van der Hoeven of Kansas State University. with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, featured every Wednesday right here. And our time once more is away. Thanks for being along with us, and please rejoin us here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.